The emergency signal came from the edge of known space, crackling through static and interference. On Earth, the communication center in Geneva buzzed with sudden activity as technicians scrambled to clear the transmission. The voice that emerged from the speakers was alien, but the universal translator worked well enough to convey the desperation behind each word. This is High Commander ZXHY of the Zephyrian Confederation. We request immediate audience with the Terran Council. Our situation is critical. Dr. Amanda Walsh, Earth's lead xenologist, leaned forward in her chair. In all her years of studying alien species, she had never heard such fear in a Zephyrian voice. These were the same beings who had once laughed at humanity's first attempts at space travel, calling humans primitive hairless apes who would never master the stars. The main screen flickered to life, showing the image of a tall, blue-skinned humanoid with 4 arms and silver eyes that usually held nothing but arrogance. Today, those eyes looked haunted. ZXHY's ceremonial armor was cracked and dirty, and burn marks scarred the walls behind him. Honorable humans, ZXHY began, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. We come before you in our darkest hour. The Zephyrian Confederation, which has ruled the outer spiral for 3,000 years, faces total extinction. Secretary General Maria Santos sat up straighter. The Zephyrians controlled nearly 200 star systems. Their military was considered the strongest in known space. What could possibly threaten them so completely? ZXHY continued, his voice breaking slightly. 6 months ago, our deep space sensors detected massive objects moving through the void. We thought they were asteroids at first. Our scientists said they were natural formations drifting between stars. We were wrong. The display changed to show grainy footage from a Zephyrian warship. Dark shapes moved across the screen, but they were too large and too regular to be natural. As the camera focused, the humans could see that these objects were clearly artificial. They looked like enormous metal insects, each one the size of a small moon. They call themselves the Devourers, ZXHY said. They do not communicate, they do not negotiate. They simply arrive at a star system and begin their work. Within days, entire worlds are stripped bare. Planets that took billions of years to form are reduced to empty shells. More footage played. The humans watched in horror as massive machines descended onto the surface of a world. The planet's surface began to change, forests disappearing, oceans boiling away, even the rocky ground itself seeming to melt and reshape. We sent our finest fleets against them, ZXHY continued. Ships that had never known defeat. The Devourers destroyed them without effort. Our weapons barely scratched their hulls. Our most powerful plasma cannons had no effect. In 6 months, we have lost 57 star systems. Billions of our people are dead or missing. Dr. Walsh exchanged glances with her colleagues. The Zephyrians had technology that was hundreds of years ahead of humanity in many areas. If their weapons couldn't stop these Devourers, what hope did anyone have? We have studied your species, humans, ZXHY said, his silver eyes focusing directly on the camera. You are young, yes. Your technology is primitive compared to ours. But you have something that we have forgotten. You have survived when survival seemed impossible. You have won wars against stronger enemies. You have found ways to succeed when logic said you should fail. The High Commander stood up, and for the first time in recorded history, a Zephyrian leader bowed to humans. His 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of complete submission. We beg you, people of Earth, help us fight the Devourers. We offer you everything we have. Our most advanced starship designs, our weapons technology, control of entire sectors of space. We will serve as your vassals, your subjects, anything you ask. Just please, help us save what remains of our people. The transmission. Room fell silent. Secretary General Santos looked around at her advisors, seeing the same shock on every face. The proud Zephyrians, who had treated humanity like children for decades, were now offering to become servants in exchange for help. High Commander, Santos said carefully, we need to understand the full scope of this threat. How many of these Devourer ships are there? Our best estimates suggest at least 10,000 individual units, Zexhai replied. They move in groups of 50 to 100, systematically working their way through our territory. At their current pace, they will reach our capital world of Zephyr Prime within 3 months. Admiral James Harrison, Earth's top military strategist, leaned forward. What do your scientists know about their technology? How do they strip planets so quickly? We believe they use some form of molecular conversion technology, Zexhai answered. They break down matter at the atomic level and reconstruct it for their own purposes. We do not know why they do this or what their final goal might be. We only know that they cannot be stopped by conventional means. Dr. Walsh cleared her throat. High Commander, with respect, why do you believe humanity can succeed where your advanced military has failed? For a moment, Zexhai's proud expression returned. Then it crumbled, replaced by something like respect. Because humans fight differently than we do. When faced with impossible odds, you do not simply throw your strongest warriors at the problem. You find new ways to think, new strategies that others cannot imagine. You have a saying on your world: work smarter, not harder. We Zephyrians have always relied on superior force. Perhaps that is why we are losing. Secretary General Santos nodded slowly. High Commander, we will need time to study your data and consult with our military and scientific leaders. But I can promise you this: humanity will not stand by and watch an entire species be destroyed. Give us 72 hours to formulate a response. Relief flooded Zexhai's features. Thank you, Secretary General. We will await your answer. And we will pray to whatever God still listen that you can find a solution where we have found only defeat. The transmission ended, leaving the room in heavy silence. Admiral Harrison was the first to speak. They expect us to send our fleets, don't they? He said. They want us to mount some kind of glorious last stand against these devourers. Dr. Walsh shook her head. If their weapons can't hurt these machines, ours certainly can't. We need to think about this differently. Santos stood up, her mind already racing through possibilities. Get me the heads of every scientific department, every military branch, and every humanitarian organization. We have 72 hours to come up with a plan that might just save an entire species. As the officials filed out to begin their urgent consultations, none of them realized that humanity's response would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Zephyrians expected warriors and weapons. They would get something far more powerful: human ingenuity and the radical idea that sometimes the best way to win a war is to refuse to fight it on the enemy's terms. The clock was ticking, and billions of lives hung in the balance. But for the first time in months, there was hope flickering in the darkness between the stars. 3 days later, the Zephyrian High Command waited in their war room for humanity's response. High Commander Zexhai stood before a massive holographic display showing the Devourer advance. Red markers indicated lost systems, while yellow showed worlds currently under attack. The yellow markers were turning red faster than anyone wanted to count. The humans should respond soon, said General Kexmore, his forearms crossed behind his back. Perhaps they will bring their new plasma torpedo technology. I have heard it is quite advanced for such a young species. Or their stealth fighters, added Admiral Vexishaw. Human pilots have shown remarkable skill in small craft combat. Zexhai said nothing. He had spent the last 3 days studying every piece of intelligence the Confederation had on human military tactics. What he found both impressed and puzzled him. Humans won battles they should have lost, but rarely in the ways anyone expected. The communication array chimed, indicating an incoming transmission from Earth. The Zephyrian leaders straightened their uniforms and prepared to greet what they assumed would be a fleet of human warships. Instead, the hologram showed a middle-aged human woman in a blue civilian uniform. She had kind eyes and graying hair, looking more like someone's grandmother than a military commander. Greetings, High Commander Zexhai, she said with a slight smile. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Humanitarian Fleet. I want to begin by expressing our deepest sympathy for the losses your people have suffered. Zexhai blinked his silver eyes in confusion. Humanitarian Fleet? He had expected to hear from the Terran Defense Force or the Space Marines. Admiral Chen, he replied carefully. We are grateful for your sympathy. However, time is critical. When can we expect your military forces to arrive? Our latest intelligence suggests the Devourers will reach the Kepler system within 2 weeks. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Yes, we've reviewed your data thoroughly. That's exactly why we're sending our response team immediately. They should arrive in the Kepler system within 10 days. Relief flooded through the Zephyrian command center. Finally, help was coming. How many ships are you sending? Asked General Kexmore. What classes? We can coordinate our remaining forces, with yours for maximum effectiveness. Chen consulted a datapad. We're sending 47 vessels in the first wave. Most are Mercy-class evacuation ships, with some Atlas-class cargo transports and a few Aurora-class mobile hospitals. We're also bringing prefabricated housing units, medical supplies, agricultural equipment, and about 15,000 civilian specialists. The silence in the Zephyrian war room was deafening. Admiral Vexishaw was the first to find her voice. Admiral Chen, I think there may be some misunderstanding. We need military assistance, warships, weapons. These Devourers cannot be negotiated with. Oh, we understand completely, Chen replied cheerfully. That's exactly why we're not bringing warships. We're bringing something much more important. Hope for your people's survival. Zexhai felt his blood run cold. Admiral, with the greatest respect, evacuation ships will not stop the Devourers from destroying our worlds. You're absolutely right, Chen agreed. We're not planning to stop them. We're planning to make sure they don't matter. The holographic display changed to show a star chart marked with dozens of systems far from the current conflict zone. Green dots indicated uninhabited but habitable worlds, while blue dots showed existing colonies with room for refugees. We've identified 43 suitable worlds for immediate colonization, Chen continued. Most are in systems at least 200 light-years from the Devourer advance. Our advance teams are already setting up temporary shelters and basic infrastructure. General Kexmore's mandibles clicked in agitation. You want us to abandon our homeworlds? To run like cowards? I want you to live, Chen said simply. Hi, Commander. Your message made it clear that conventional military tactics have failed against the Devourers. So we're not going to use conventional tactics. But surely you have some plan to fight them, Zexhai asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Some new weapon or strategy? Chen's expression grew gentle but firm. Commander, my species learned something very important about war during our early history. Sometimes the only way to win is to change what winning means. You've defined victory as stopping the Devourers. We're defining victory as keeping your people alive. The transmission shifted to show footage of human ships already in motion. But these weren't sleek warships bristling with weapons. They were massive boxy vessels designed for cargo and passengers. Some were so large they looked like flying cities. The first evacuation convoy will reach your outer colonies within 5 days, Chen explained. We recommend starting with civilians from the most threatened worlds. Our specialists will help coordinate the logistics. This is madness, Admiral Vexishaw muttered. We are the Zephyrian Confederation. We do not flee from battle. And how has that philosophy worked out so far? Chen asked, not unkindly. Commander, I've studied your military history. Your people are brave warriors, some of the finest in the galaxy. But sometimes bravery means knowing when to save lives instead of throwing them away. Zexhai stared at the star chart showing all those distant, safe worlds. Part of him was horrified at the idea of abandoning everything his people had built. Another part was beginning to understand the logic. What about our military forces? He asked. Our ships, our weapons, our strategic resources? Bring what you can carry, Chen replied. Leave what you can't. Technology can be rebuilt. Knowledge can be preserved. But lives, once lost, cannot be recovered. You make it sound so simple, General Kexmore said bitterly. It's not simple at all, Chen admitted. It's the hardest thing anyone can do. Letting go of the past to secure the future, but it's better than the alternative. The transmission showed more human ships, these ones carrying strange equipment that the Zephyrians didn't recognize. There were vast greenhouse modules, water purification systems, and what looked like entire factories designed for rapid deployment. "What is all that equipment for?" HFY asked. "Building new homes," Chen said. "Real homes, not just refugee camps. Our engineers have designed modular cities that can be set up in weeks rather than years. Our agricultural specialists are bringing seeds and growing systems adapted for different planetary conditions. Our medical teams are studying Zephyrian physiology so they can provide proper health care during the transition." For the first time since the crisis began, Admiral Vexishaw looked hopeful. "You would do all this for us, even though we have been difficult neighbors in the past?" Chen smiled warmly. "Admiral, humanity has one rule when it comes to extinction-level threats. Nobody gets left behind. We'll argue about politics and territory later. Right now, we have people to save." The conversation continued for another hour, with Chen patiently explaining the logistics of the massive evacuation effort. The humans had thought of everything: psychological support for refugees, educational programs to preserve Zephyrian culture, even recreational facilities to maintain morale during the transition. When the transmission finally ended, the Zephyrian command staff sat in stunned silence. This wasn't what they had expected. They had asked for warriors and received caregivers. They had begged for weapons and been offered shelter. "Do you think it will work?" Admiral Vexishaw asked quietly. HFY looked at the star chart still glowing in the center of the room. 43 worlds where his people could start over. It wasn't the glorious victory he had hoped for, but it was something precious. A future. "Don't know," he admitted. "But I think I'm beginning to understand why humans have survived everything the universe has thrown at them. They don't just fight their enemies. They outlive them." The evacuation began with chaos. On the Zephyrian world of Kextal, millions of civilians crowded the spaceports with whatever belongings they could carry. Children cried, adults argued, and the elderly sat in confusion as their entire world was turned upside down. The proud Zephyrian military struggled to maintain order, while grappling with the reality that their role had changed from warriors to refugee coordinators. Then the human ships arrived. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the evacuation vessel Sanctuary as it entered orbit around Kextal. Through the view screen, she could see the beautiful blue and gold planet that would soon be stripped bare by the Devourers. Her ship alone could carry 50,000 refugees, and she was just one of 12 vessels in this convoy. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Park from the communication station, "we're receiving multiple distress calls from the surface. It sounds like complete pandemonium down there." Rodriguez nodded calmly. She had seen this before during Earth's own refugee crises. "Standard protocol, Lieutenant. Deploy the coordination teams first, then begin systematic evacuation by sectors." On the planet's surface, Zephyrian civilians watched in amazement as small human shuttles landed in perfectly organized patterns. Outstepped humans wearing bright blue uniforms with translation devices and portable computers. They didn't carry weapons. Instead, they carried medical scanners, food packets, and what looked like toys for frightened children. Dr. James Okafor approached a group of Zephyrian families huddled near the spaceport. The aliens towered over him with their 7-foot height and 4 arms, but their silver eyes showed the same fear he had seen in human refugees. "Hello," he said through his translator, kneeling down to be less intimidating. "My name is James. We're here to help you get to safety." An elderly Zephyrian male stepped forward, his ceremonial robes torn and dirty. "Human, I am Elder Texwin. We appreciate your assistance, but this is hopeless. There are too many people, too few ships. The Devourers will arrive before we can evacuate everyone." Dr. Okafor smiled gently. "Elder Texwin, that's exactly why we brought 47 ships to this system alone. We're not just evacuating Kextal. We're evacuating 12 worlds simultaneously. And this is just the first wave." The Elder's mandibles clicked in disbelief. 47 ships? But the intelligence report said you were only sending a small fleet. "We don't really do small fleets when lives are at stake," Okafor replied, checking his tablet. "Now let's get your family processed. We have medical screening, temporary quarters assignment, and cultural preservation documentation to complete." Meanwhile, in the Kepler system's outer colonies, human agricultural specialist Dr. Sarah Kim was working with Zephyrian farmers to preserve their heritage. The aliens were amazed as she carefully collected seeds from their crops, documented their farming techniques, and even helped them disassemble entire greenhouse complexes for transport. "You would truly preserve our growing methods?" asked farmer Jexlin, watching Dr. Kim catalog his prize-winning fruit trees. "Of course," she replied, carefully packing seedlings into biopreservation containers. "Food is culture. These trees represent hundreds of years of selective breeding and agricultural knowledge. We're not just saving your lives, we're saving your way of life." Back in space, the massive operation continued with clockwork precision. Human ships moved between worlds like giant shuttles, their cargo holds filled with refugees and precious cultural artifacts. The Mercy-class evacuation ships were marvels of humanitarian engineering, with comfortable sleeping quarters, recreation areas, schools for children, and even small hydroponic gardens to provide fresh food during the journey. Aboard the New Horizon, Zephyrian Admiral Vexisha walked through the ship's corridors in amazement. Human crew members worked alongside Zephyrian refugees, teaching them how to use the ship's systems and helping them adapt to the temporary living spaces. Children of both species played together in the recreation areas, their laughter echoing through the halls. "This is not what I expected," she admitted to Captain Chen, Admiral Sarah Chen's daughter who commanded this particular vessel. Captain Mei Chen looked up from her datapad, where she was tracking the evacuation progress. "What did you expect, Admiral? Crowded cargo holds, military efficiency over comfort, the bare minimum needed to transport bodies from one place to another." Vexisha gestured at a nearby lounge where refugees relaxed in comfortable chairs, while human volunteers served traditional Zephyrian tea. "This is more like a luxury passenger liner. We learned long ago that how you treat refugees during crisis determines how well they recover afterward," May explained. "Dignity and comfort aren't luxuries in situations like this. They're necessities for psychological survival." The massive evacuation wasn't without its challenges. On the industrial world of Mextar, Zephyrian military leaders initially refused to abandon their weapons factories and strategic resources. General Kexmore stood defiantly in his command center as human evacuation coordinators pleaded with him to begin the civilian exodus. "We cannot simply leave our military infrastructure to the devourers," he declared, his forearms crossed stubbornly. "These facilities represent centuries of technological advancement." Human Colonel Patricia Washington studied the tactical displays with professional interest. "General, I understand your concerns, but those facilities will be consumed regardless of whether you're here to defend them or not. The question is, do you want to lose buildings or do you want to lose people?" "We are soldiers," Kexmore replied stiffly. "We do not abandon our posts." "Actually," Washington said with a slight smile, "the best soldiers know when to make tactical retreats to preserve their forces for future battles. Your people will need experienced military leaders in their new homes. Dead heroes can't protect anyone." The argument might have continued, but it was interrupted by a young Zephyrian communications officer. "General, sir, we're receiving reports from the outer sensor grid. Devourer scouts have been detected. They'll reach this system in 6 days. The color drained from Kexmore's face. 6 days was faster than their worst-case projections. Washington stepped forward, her voice gentle, but firm. "General, your people need you alive and leading them to safety. Let us help you save what really matters." The final evacuation from Mextar was completed just 18 hours before the first Devourer ships entered the system. From the bridge of the last transport to leave, General Kexmore watched through the view screen as his homeworld grew smaller and smaller. For the first time in his military career, retreat felt like victory. Throughout the evacuation zone, similar scenes played, out on dozens of worlds. Human ships worked tirelessly, their crews surviving on minimal sleep and maximum determination. Psychologists provided counseling for traumatized refugees. Engineers helped dismantle important cultural monuments for reconstruction later. Teachers set up schools aboard the transport ships to maintain some normalcy for the children. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist aboard the research vessel Discovery, spent her time documenting Zephyrian biology and culture. Her mission was officially listed as scientific research, but she had a hidden agenda that even the refugees didn't know about. "Fascinating," she murmured, studying tissue samples from various Zephyrian plants and animals. "The genetic markers are incredibly complex, but they follow predictable patterns." Her assistant, Dr. Marcus Webb, looked up from his own research. "Finding anything useful for the colonization effort?" "Oh yes," Elena replied, though she wasn't thinking about colonization at all. "Very useful indeed." As the weeks passed, the Great Exodus continued. Human ships ferried millions of Zephyrian refugees to distant, safe worlds where other human teams had prepared temporary cities. The construction was remarkable. Entire communities sprang up in days, complete with housing, medical facilities, schools, and even cultural centers where refugees could maintain their traditions. On the refugee world of Haven's Rest, Elder Texwin stood in the center of a brand new settlement that housed 50,000 of his people. Human engineers had designed the buildings using traditional Zephyrian architectural principles, and human farmers were already teaching refugees how to grow crops in the planet's alien soil. "It's not home," he said to Dr. Okafor, who had stayed to help with the settlement process. "No," Okafor agreed, "but it's a beginning, and beginnings can become something beautiful if you give them time." Behind them, Zephyrian children played, with human children in carefully designed playgrounds. Adults of both species worked together to build community gardens and workshop spaces. It wasn't the glorious last stand that the Zephyrian military had envisioned, but it was something perhaps more important: hope for the future. The evacuation was nearly complete, but the real test was still to come. Deep in her laboratory aboard the Discovery, Dr. Vasquez completed her secret research and sent an encrypted message to Admiral Chen. The Devourers were still advancing, consuming world after world with mechanical precision. But humanity's true response was only just beginning. 3 months after the evacuation began, the last transport ship lifted off from Zephyr Prime, the Confederation's capital world. High Commander Zexhai stood at the observation deck of the massive vessel, Eternal Hope, watching his homeworld shrink into the distance. In 12 hours, the Devourers would arrive to strip away everything his ancestors had built over 3 millennia. The evacuation had been a masterpiece of organization. Humanity had saved over 90% of the Zephyrian population, relocating them to 43 different worlds across human-controlled space. But as Zexhai watched his planet disappear among the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had simply delayed the inevitable. The Devourers were still out there, still consuming everything in their path. How long before they found the refugee worlds? "Commander Zexhai," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez approaching, her expression serious but not grim. The human xenobiologist had been present during much of the evacuation, though he had rarely seen her interact with the refugees directly. "Dr. Vasquez," he replied with a respectful nod, "I wanted to thank you for everything your people have done. The evacuation was beyond anything we could have imagined." "The evacuation was just the first part," Elena said, settling into a chair beside him. "Commander, I need to show you something, but first I need to ask you a question. In all your encounters with the Devourers, did you ever wonder why they strip planets so thoroughly?" Zexhai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "We assumed they were harvesting resources for their technology. Metals, energy sources, perhaps even organic compounds for fuel." "That was our first theory too," Elena agreed. "But our analysis of the residue they leave behind tells a different story. The Devourers aren't just stripping planets for resources, they're terraforming them." She activated a portable holographic display, showing detailed scans of worlds the Devourers had already processed. Where once there had been diverse ecosystems, now there were geometric patterns of metallic structures and carefully arranged mineral deposits. "They're not destroying planets randomly," Elena continued. "They're rebuilding them according to some specific design. Each processed world follows the same pattern, like they're preparing the galaxy for something." "Preparing for what?" Zexhai asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "We don't know yet. but we've discovered something important about how their technology works. Elena switched the display to show microscopic images of devourer machinery. Their terraforming process relies on molecular disassembly and reconstruction. They break down matter at the atomic level and rebuild it according to their programming. HFY studied the images with growing interest. As a military commander, he had learned to look for weaknesses in enemy systems. "And you found a flaw in this process?" Elena smiled, the expression both reassuring and slightly mysterious. "Not a flaw exactly, more like an incompatibility. Dr. Webb and I spent the last 3 months studying fragments of devourer technology that your people recovered. We discovered that their molecular disassembly process has trouble with certain types of biological markers." "What kind of biological markers?" "The kind that humanity has been developing for agricultural and medical purposes for the last century," Elena replied. "Genetic tags that we use to track plant growth, monitor ecosystem health, and prevent contamination in our colonies." The implications hit HFY like a physical blow. "You've been marking the refugee worlds. Every settlement, every building, every piece of infrastructure we've installed over the last 3 months has been carefully seeded with these biological markers," Elena confirmed. "Not just on the surface, but deep in the soil, in the water, systems, even in the air filtration units. The markers reproduce and spread naturally, creating an invisible network throughout each ecosystem." HFY's silver eyes widened as he began to understand. "And when the devourers encounter these markers, their terraforming technology will malfunction catastrophically," Elena said. "Instead of orderly molecular disassembly, they'll experience cascade failures throughout their entire network. The biological markers act like a computer virus, but one that attacks their fundamental operating principles." The holographic display changed to show a computer simulation. Devourer ships approached, a world marked with the human biological tags. As their terraforming beams made contact with the planet's surface, red warning indicators began flashing throughout their systems. The orderly process of molecular disassembly became chaotic, unpredictable. The machines began to tear themselves apart. "We tested this simulation using data from captured devourer fragments," Elena explained. "The results were consistent across 17 different trial runs. The biological markers create a feedback loop that their technology cannot compensate." HFY stood up abruptly, pacing to the observation window. "You planned this from the beginning. The evacuation, the refugee settlements, all of it was designed to create a trap." "Not a trap," Elena corrected gently. "A solution. Commander, we could have sent our fleets to fight the devourers directly. We probably would have lost, just like your forces did. Instead, we chose to save your people while simultaneously creating a defense that the devourers cannot overcome." "But why keep this secret? Why not tell us what you were planning?" Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "Because it required your people to genuinely relocate, to really start new lives in those settlements. The biological markers work best when they're integrated into living ecosystems with real populations. If your people had known they were living in a weapons system, they might not have committed to making those worlds truly home." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in HFY's mind. The human insistence on proper housing instead of temporary shelters. The agricultural programs that seemed excessive for refugee populations. The careful attention to cultural preservation and community building. You weren't just saving refugees, he realized. You were creating sustainable colonies that would naturally spread your biological markers throughout multiple star systems. 43 star systems, to be precise, Elena said. Each one now protected by a defense system that the devourers cannot detect or counter. And because the markers reproduce naturally, they'll continue to spread to neighboring systems over time. HFY felt a mixture of awe and concern. What happens to my people when the devourers encounter these protected worlds? Nothing, Elena assured him. The biological markers are completely harmless to all known forms of organic life. They're essentially just very complex proteins that exist naturally in Earth's biosphere. We've simply learned to synthesize them and direct their growth. And the devourers? Elena's smile turned cold for the first time since their conversation began. The Devourers will discover that there are some things in this galaxy that they cannot consume. When their technology fails, their ability to process new resources will be permanently damaged. They'll be forced to abandon their terraforming agenda. The holographic display showed the final simulation, Devourer fleets approaching the refugee worlds, their technology failing catastrophically upon contact with the biological markers, the mechanical entities retreating in confusion as their fundamental programming was disrupted. How long before we know if it works? Zexai asked. According to our calculations, the first Devourer scout ship should reach Haven's Rest within 6 days, Elena replied. That's where we relocated the largest population of your people. It's also the world where our biological markers are most thoroughly integrated into the ecosystem. Zexai nodded slowly. In 6 days, they would learn whether humanity's audacious plan would save both species or merely delay their destruction. Either way, he was beginning to understand that he had severely underestimated these remarkable humans. Dr. Vasquez, he said finally, when this is over, regardless of the outcome, the Zephyrian people owe humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Elena stood up and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Commander, humanity learned long ago that survival isn't a competition, it's a collaboration. Your people are safe and soon they'll be truly free. That's payment enough for us. As she walked away, Zexai turned back to the observation window. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were still advancing, unaware that they were about to encounter something they had never faced before, an entire galaxy that refused to be consumed. The first Devourer scout ship arrived at Haven's Rest exactly when Dr. Vasquez had predicted. On the planet's surface, 50,000 Zephyrian refugees went about their daily lives in the settlement that humanity had built for them. Children attended schools taught by both human and Zephyrian teachers. Adults worked in factories and farms that produced goods for their new communities. None of them knew that they were about to become the key to defeating an unstoppable enemy. Hi. Commander Zexai stood in the command center of the orbital monitoring station, watching the massive dark shape approach the planet. Beside him, Admiral Sarah Chen monitored data streams from sensors placed throughout the system. Contact in 30 minutes, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez from her position at the science station. All biological markers are showing normal activity levels. The ecosystem integration is complete. Zexai's 4 hands clenched into fists. Everything depended on the next hour. If the human plan failed, the Devourers would consume this world just like all the others, and 50,000 of his people would die for nothing. Remember, Admiral Chen said calmly, our role is to observe and document. No matter what happens, we do not engage. The biological markers either work or they don't. On the planet below, the Devourer scout ship began its standard approach pattern. It was smaller than the main terraforming vessels, but still massive enough to blot out the sun over several cities. The ship's sensors swept across the planet's surface, cataloging resources and preparing for the molecular disassembly process. Energy readings are spiking, Dr. Vasquez reported. The scout ship is beginning its preliminary analysis. The alien vessel descended through the atmosphere, its hull glowing with the heat of atmospheric entry. On the surface, Zephyrian refugees looked up in terror at the approaching machine. They had seen these ships before on their homeworlds, just before everything they loved was destroyed. But something was different this time. As the Devourer ship lowered its molecular disassembly beams toward the planet's surface, the readings from its sensors began to fluctuate wildly. The orderly streams of data that normally guided the terraforming process became chaotic, filled with information that didn't match any known patterns. It's working, Dr. Vasquez whispered, watching her displays with intense concentration. The biological markers are interfacing with their scanning systems. The ship's computers are trying to process biological data that they're not equipped to handle. The Devourer vessel suddenly stopped its descent, hovering uncertainly above the planet's largest city. Its scanning beams swept back and forth across the settlement, but instead of the steady blue light that normally preceded planetary consumption, the beams flickered and changed colors unpredictably. The biological markers are reproducing faster, Then their systems can catalog them, Elena explained, her voice filled with growing excitement. It's like trying to count raindrops in a storm. Their computers are overloading trying to process the data. Aboard the Devourer ship, automated systems struggled to understand what they were encountering. The standard terraforming protocols called for molecular disassembly of all organic and inorganic matter, followed by reconstruction according to predetermined patterns. But the biological markers were something new. Complex proteins that seemed to exist in a state of constant change, multiplying and evolving faster than the ship's computers could analyze them. Warning lights began flashing throughout the alien vessel as its primary processing systems overloaded. The molecular disassembly beam shut down automatically as safety protocols engaged. For the first time in its existence, a Devourer ship encountered something it could not consume. My God, Admiral Chen breathed, watching the displays. It's actually working. The scout ship began to rise, backing away from the planet as its systems attempted to reset. But the biological markers had already interfaced with its sensors during the scanning process. The proteins had been designed by human scientists to be incredibly persistent, clinging to any technological surface they encountered and reproducing exponentially. The markers are spreading throughout its hull, Dr. Vasquez reported. They're following the ship's own data networks, multiplying in its computer systems. The Devourer technology is trying to purge them, but they're reproducing faster than they can be eliminated. On the planet below, Zephyrian refugees emerged from their shelters to watch the impossible sight of a Devourer ship retreating. Elder Texwin stood in the settlement's central plaza, tears streaming down his face as he watched their greatest enemy flee in confusion. But the real test was yet to come. As the scout ship retreated to a safe distance, it began transmitting data to the main Devourer fleet. Within hours, a massive terraforming vessel arrived, 10 times larger than the scout ship and equipped with the most advanced molecular disassembly technology in the galaxy. Here we go, Admiral Chen said grimly. This is the real test. The massive Devourer ship approached Haven's Rest with the confidence of a predator that had never known defeat. Its captain, if such artificial beings could be called captains, had processed hundreds of worlds without encountering any resistance that could not be overcome by raw power. The ship's primary terraforming beam lanced down toward the planet's surface, a column of energy capable of reducing mountains to their component atoms in minutes. But as the beam made contact with the settlement where human and Zephyrian children played together, something unprecedented happened. The biological markers, now spread throughout the planet's ecosystem by 3 months of natural reproduction, reacted to the terraforming energy like an immune system responding to an infection. The complex proteins began to multiply exponentially, creating a cascading reaction that interfered with the molecular disassembly process at the quantum level. Instead of orderly destruction, the terraforming beam created chaotic feedback loops. Energy that should have been precisely controlled began to fluctuate wildly. The Devourer ship's computers, designed to process orderly data streams, suddenly found themselves dealing with quantum-level chaos that followed no predictable patterns. The biological markers are creating quantum interference, Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice filled with awe. They're not just overloading the computers, they're disrupting the fundamental physics that the terraforming technology depends on. The massive Devourer vessel shuddered as its primary systems began to fail. Warning signals cascaded through its networks as the biological markers spread from the terraforming beam back into the ship itself. The proteins followed every energy connection, every data pathway, multiplying and evolving with each passing second. It's beautiful, Elena whispered, watching the readings. The markers are adapting to the ship's technology in real time, becoming more effective with each iteration. It's like watching evolution in fast forward. The Devourer ship's terraforming beam shut down as emergency protocols engaged. But it was too late. The biological markers had already infiltrated its core systems, creating chaos throughout its network. The vessel began to retreat, its movements erratic as its navigation system struggled to function with compromised data. "Admiral," came a transmission from the planet's surface. It was Captain Rodriguez commanding the human forces on Haven's Rest. "We're reading massive system failures aboard the Devourer ship. It's withdrawing from orbit." But the most remarkable sight was yet to come. As the damaged Devourer vessel retreated to its fleet, the biological markers it carried began to spread to other ships through their interconnected communication networks. Like a computer virus jumping between systems, the proteins propagated through the entire fleet, causing cascade failures in ship after ship. "They're all withdrawing," Admiral Chen reported, watching her tactical display with amazement. "The entire Devourer fleet is pulling back from this sector." High Commander HFY stared at the displays, hardly believing what he was seeing. "How many ships?" "Over 300 vessels," Chen replied. "And if our projections are correct, the biological markers will continue to spread through their network. Any ship that comes into contact with an infected vessel will also become compromised." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her console with a smile that mixed scientific pride with deep relief. "Commander, I don't think the Devourers will be able to approach any of the refugee worlds. The biological markers are now part of their ecosystem's natural processes. They'll continue to reproduce and evolve, creating a permanent defense against molecular disassembly technology." 3 weeks later, High Commander HFY stood in the same plaza on Haven's Rest, where Elder Texwin had watched the first Devourer retreat. But now the scene was transformed. Human and Zephyrian children played together on equipment built from both species' design principles. Adults worked side by side in workshops and laboratories, sharing knowledge and creating new technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Admiral Sarah Chen joined him at the plaza's central fountain, where a holographic display showed the current status of all 43 refugee worlds. Everyone showed green indicators, safe, thriving, and protected by the invisible network of biological markers. "You did something unprecedented," HFY said to her. "You saved my people without firing a single shot." Chen smiled, watching a group of Zephyrian and human scientists